The acrid scent of gunpowder hung heavy in the air, a familiar perfume that clung to the back of Ryland's throat. He watched as the woman, Zaria Trennan, according to the range waiver, methodically reloaded the Glock 19. Her movements were precise, economical, almost too practiced for someone who claimed to be a veterinary technician. He leaned against the wall, feigning disinterest, his gaze fixed on the target downrange, but his peripheral vision remained locked on her. Veterinary technician. The incongruity gnawed at him. His fingers instinctively traced the faded scar tissue on his left forearm, a memento from a mission gone sideways, a mission where he'd seen a tattoo just like the one peeking from beneath her sleeve. A stylized black orchid, nestled within a geometric frame. The mark of Glassvale. Vic, his colleague from the bureau, slapped him on the back, jovial as ever. "Damn, Ryland, that's some grouping. You're still got it." Ryland forced a smile, the muscles in his face stiff. Muscle memory. Hard to lose that. He nodded subtly towards Zaria. "New customer?" Vic squinted, following his gaze. "Yes, seems so. Pretty good shot, too. Don't see many women handle a Glock that well." "No," Ryland agreed, his voice a low rumble. "You don't." He could feel the tension coiling in his gut, a predator's instinct kicking in. It had been years since he'd last seen that tattoo, years since Glassvale had been officially shut down. Yet, here it was, etched onto the skin of a woman who claimed to treat sick puppies. He'd been told the program had been dismantled, the operatives reassigned, identities scrubbed clean. He believed it, or at least he'd tried to. But the ghost of Anaka Ree, the operative with the orchid tattoo, had haunted him ever since. He had owed her his life. He'd seen her disappear into the chaos of that final mission, a wisp of smoke in the burning wreckage, and he'd never truly accepted that she was gone. Vic, oblivious to the turmoil churning inside him, continued his commentary on Zaria's shooting skills. Ryland barely heard him. His mind was a whirlwind of fragmented memories, the flash of gunfire, the stench of blood, Anaka's steady hand bandaging his wound as the world crumbled around them. He remembered the quiet intensity in her eyes, the unwavering focus, a warrior's spirit cloaked in an unsettling calm. He remembered the orchid tattoo, a splash of black against the pale skin of her wrist. He pushed himself off the wall, his decision made. He had to know. He had to understand. The years of unanswered questions, the nagging suspicion that he'd been lied to, it all culminated in this moment, in this dusty Arizona shooting range. He took a casual step towards Zaria, feigning interest in the selection of handguns displayed behind the counter. He needed a closer look, a chance to confirm his suspicions without alerting her. The air crackled with an unseen energy, the silence between them pregnant with unspoken words, with a shared history buried beneath layers of deception. His heart hammered against his ribs. He could feel the familiar rush of adrenaline, the same primal instinct that had kept him alive through countless missions. He wasn't sure what he expected to find, what he hoped to achieve. Closure? Answers? Or maybe just a flicker of recognition in those cool gray eyes. He stopped a few feet away, pretending to examine a Beretta 92. His peripheral vision caught her lowering the Glock, the spent magazine clattering onto the counter. She turned, her movements fluid and graceful, and their eyes met. Time seemed to slow to a crawl. He searched her face, looking for any trace of the woman he remembered, the ghost that had haunted his dreams. Her expression was carefully neutral, her eyes guarded, giving nothing away. Yet, beneath the surface, he sensed a flicker of something familiar, a spark of recognition that mirrored his own. It was in the subtle tightening of her jaw, the almost imperceptible widening of her pupils. He knew. He just knew. "Nice shooting," he said, his voice low and controlled. It was a gamble, a test. She tilted her head, studying him with an unnerving intensity. He could almost feel the weight of her gaze, probing, assessing. "Thanks," she replied, her voice even, devoid of emotion. But her eyes held a story. He took another step closer, the distance between them shrinking. The scent of gun oil and sweat mingled in the air, creating a strange, intoxicating cocktail. That's a Glock 19, right? He asked, keeping his voice casual, his gaze fixed on her face. Good eye, she responded, a hint of amusement playing at the corners of her lips. A flicker of the ghost. He reached out, his hand hovering over the tattoo on her wrist. He stopped, his fingers inches from her skin. He could feel her tense, her breath hitching in her throat. Anaka, he whispered, the name a question, a plea. The amusement vanished, replaced by a cold, hard mask. Her eyes, once guarded, now blazed with a mixture of fear and defiance. I don't know what you're talking about, she said, her voice tight. But the tremor in her hand betrayed her. The orchid, he persisted, his gaze locked on the tattoo. Glass Veil. You were there. That last mission, she flinched, the mask cracking. He saw a flicker of pain, of guilt, of something deep and buried. She turned away, breaking the contact. You're mistaken, she said, her voice barely a whisper. Am I? He countered, stepping closer. I saw you. I owe you my life. She turned back to him, her eyes filled with a desperate plea. Please, she whispered, just leave it alone. He reached out again, this time gently touching her wrist. He felt the familiar texture of the tattoo beneath his fingertips. It was real. She was real. We need to talk, he said, his voice firm, unwavering. About Glass Veil. About everything. A single tear traced a path down her cheek. There's nothing to talk about, she choked out. It's over. It's all over. He shook his head. No, he said, his voice low and intense. It's not over. Not until we expose the truth. A flicker of resolve hardened her gaze. All right, she conceded, her voice strained. But not here. Later that evening, the dial tone hummed in Zaria's ear. Each ring felt like an eternity, a countdown to a confrontation she'd spent years avoiding. Finally, a gruff voice answered, laced with sleep and suspicion. Who is this? Glenn, Zaria said, her voice steady despite the tremor in her hands. It's Anaka. Anaka Ree. A silence hung heavy in the air, broken only by Glenn's ragged breathing. Anaka? But I know what you thought, she cut him off. But I'm alive, and we need to talk. About Glass Veil. Fear, raw and palpable, seeped through the phone line. No, I can't. Though they can't hurt you anymore, Glenn, she said, her voice taking on a steely edge. Not if we expose them. We need to tell the world what they did. Another long silence. Then a shaky sigh. All right. Glenn finally agreed, his voice resigned. All right, tell me what you need. The acrid scent of gunpowder clung to the air, a metallic tang that tickled the back of Zaria's throat. Each echoing shot, each burst of expelled shell casings, was a jolt to her already frayed nerves. She'd chosen the furthest lane, hoping the distance would offer a semblance of isolation, a fragile shield against the phantom whispers of the past. But even here, amidst the cacophony of gunfire, she felt exposed, every cell in her body screaming a silent alarm. She meticulously reloaded the Glock 19, her movements precise and economical, a practiced choreography honed over years of training. Her fingers, calloused yet sensitive, danced over the weapon with an almost unsettling grace. Don't think. Just breathe. Focus on the target. Each pull of the trigger, each satisfying thud as the lead found its mark, was a momentary reprieve, a fleeting escape from the suffocating grip of memory. Not bad for a civilian. The voice, deep and resonant, sliced through the din, sending a shiver down her spine. Her breath hitched. It couldn't be. Not here. Not now. Slowly, reluctantly, she turned. He stood a few feet away, a formidable presence even in civilian clothes. Commander Blake Ryland, the man she'd once saved, the man who should be a ghost, a figment of a life she desperately tried to bury. He remembers. The thought was a cold knot in her stomach. Her carefully constructed facade, the mundane life she'd painstakingly built, threatened to crumble under the weight of his gaze. I've had some practice, she replied, her voice deliberately neutral, devoid of any hint of recognition. Her heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic drumbeat against the silence that stretched between them. Every instinct screamed at her to run, to disappear back into the anonymity she so desperately craved. But something held her rooted to the spot, a morbid fascination with the danger he represented, the shared history they could never acknowledge. He leaned against a nearby counter, his posture relaxed, yet radiating an undeniable intensity. "That's an understatement," he chuckled, a low rumble in his chest. His eyes, the color of a stormy sea, scanned her face, lingering for a fraction of a second too long on the small, stylized hummingbird tattooed behind her ear. The symbol of Glass Vale. Their shared secret. Zaria's blood ran cold. He saw it. He knows. The world tilted on its axis. Her carefully constructed walls threatened to implode, burying her under the debris of her past. "I prefer to be prepared," she said, forcing the words past the tightness in her throat. Her mind raced, desperately searching for an escape route, a plausible explanation, anything to deflect the suspicion that swirled in his eyes. "Think, Anaka! Think!" She willed herself to remain calm, to project an air of nonchalance that belied the turmoil raging within. Prepared for what? His voice was soft, almost gentle, but the underlying steel was unmistakable. The question hung in the air, heavy with unspoken meaning. He was testing her, probing the edges of her carefully crafted disguise. "Life," she responded, her voice barely a whisper. The word felt hollow, a mockery of the existence she now led. A life lived in the shadows, haunted by the ghosts of her past. Ryland's gaze intensified, his eyes boring into hers with an unnerving intensity. "That ink, I've seen it before." Her breath caught in her throat. Denial was futile. He knew. He remembered. The realization was a physical blow, knocking the air from her lungs. She forced herself to meet his gaze, her expression carefully blank. "Don't react. Don't get him anything. It's a hummingbird," she stated, her voice flat, devoid of emotion. "They're quite common." A flicker of amusement crossed his face. "Not like that one. Not in this part of the world." The silence stretched, taut and brittle, filled with the unspoken weight of their shared past. The air crackled with tension, thick and suffocating. Zaria fought the urge to bolt, to disappear into the vast Arizona landscape. But she couldn't. Not now. Not when the truth hung so precariously in the balance. "Look," she began, her voice strained. "I don't know what you think you saw," but he cut her off, his voice low and urgent. "Anaka." The name, her real name, spoken aloud after so long, was a shock to her system. It was a key, unlocking a Pandora's box of memories she desperately tried to keep sealed. Tears pricked at the corners of her eyes, but she blinked them back, refusing to show any weakness. She closed her eyes, took a deep breath, and when she opened them again, the carefully constructed mask of indifference had crumbled. Defeat, raw and bitter, washed over her. The fight had gone out of her. "What do you want, Ryland?" The words were barely a whisper, heavy with resignation. "The truth," he replied, his voice unwavering. "About Glassvale. About everything." The weight of the past pressed down on her, suffocating her. The secrets, the lies, the betrayals, they were a heavy burden to bear. "But maybe, just maybe, it was time to let them go." "Then we have a problem," she said, a flicker of defiance returning to her voice. "Because the truth is dangerous." He nodded, his expression grim. "I know, but it's a danger we have to face." Later that night, the desert air was cool against Zaria's skin. She sat on the porch of her small, rented house, the silence broken only by the chirping of crickets. Her phone felt heavy in her hand. She put it off long enough. It was time. She dialed the number, the familiar digits a pathway to a past she'd tried to escape. "Glenn," she said when the call connected. Her voice was steady, despite the tremor of fear that ran through her. "It's Anaka." Anaka Ree. A long silence followed, punctuated by a sharp intake of breath. "Anaka? But I thought—" "I know what you thought," she interrupted, her voice tight. "But I'm still here, and I need your help." "My help? With what?" His voice was laced with trepidation. "With the truth," she replied, her gaze fixed on the vast, star-studded sky. "It's time to expose Glassvale." The muted glow of the laptop screen painted Ryland's face in a spectral light, the lines of fatigue etched deeper by the digital glare. The house was silent, the kind of oppressive quiet that settled after midnight, a stillness that amplified the whirring of his thoughts. He scrolled through databases, his fingers hovering over the keyboard, each keystroke a percussive beat against the silence. Zaria Trenton. The name echoed in his mind, a discordant note against the sterile data scrolling past his eyes. Veterinary technician. Clean record. A life so ordinary it screamed fabrication. He ran her prints again, cross-referencing them with every agency database he could access, his gut churning with a growing unease. There was something beneath the surface, a hidden current he couldn't quite grasp. His gaze drifted to the framed photo on his desk, a reminder of a life he'd almost lost. Fallujah, 2012. The dust, the heat, the chaos, and then the searing pain. He remembered the blurry figure emerging from the smoke, a phantom of skill and precision who'd pulled him from the jaws of death. Officially, no one from Glass Veil had been deployed on that mission. Yet he'd seen her. The tattoo. He'd seen the intricate design snaking around her wrist, a symbol known only to those within the program. It had haunted his dreams for years, a fragmented memory of salvation intertwined with a chilling realization that something wasn't right. He rubbed his temples, the tension radiating from the base of his skull. The official reports were a carefully constructed lie. He'd known it instinctively, the way a seasoned warrior recognizes a feigned retreat. And now, here she was, Zaria Trenton, with eyes that held the same haunted depth as the phantom who had saved him. He pulled up the archived satellite imagery from Fallujah, painstakingly enhancing each frame. The grainy images swam before him, ghosts of a past he couldn't quite reconcile with the woman he'd met at the range. His heart hammered against his ribs as he zoomed in on a blurry figure, a fleeting glimpse of a woman amidst the chaos. The angle was oblique, the resolution poor, but there, a flash of ink on her wrist. The same intricate design. The breath hitched in his throat, a cold not tightening in his stomach. He'd found her, not the fabricated life, not the veterinary technician, but the ghost he'd been chasing for years. He needed answers. He needed to know what Glass Veil truly was, and why they had gone to such lengths to erase their presence from that mission. Most importantly, he needed to understand why Zaria had vanished, only to resurface in the most unlikely of places. He closed his laptop, the sudden darkness amplifying the weight of his thoughts. He couldn't stay here, trapped in the suffocating silence of the house. He needed air, space, the anonymity of a crowded place to process the implications of what he'd found. The 24-hour diner buzzed with a low hum of activity, the clatter of plates and the murmur of conversations creating a backdrop to his churning thoughts. He sat in a booth by the window, the neon glow of the streetlights painting the rain-slicked asphalt in streaks of artificial color. The coffee was lukewarm, bitter, but the familiar taste grounded him, a small anchor in a sea of uncertainty. He traced the rim of the mug with his finger, the rhythmic motion a counterpoint to the chaotic thoughts swirling in his mind. Why Arizona? Why a veterinary clinic? Why construct such an elaborate facade? Each question led to a labyrinth of possibilities, each path shrouded in shadows. He knew the risks involved in digging deeper, the potential repercussions of unearthing secrets that powerful people wanted buried. But he'd stared death in the face, felt the cold grip of oblivion, and he wasn't afraid. He owed her his life, and he wouldn't rest until he understood the truth. He reached for his phone, scrolling through his contacts until he found the name he was looking for. Glenn Ruiz, former logistics for the agency, a man who knew the underbelly of the beast. He hesitated, his thumb hovering over the call button. Ruiz was a risk, a loose end, but he was also his best shot at getting inside the tightly guarded walls of Glass Veil. The phone rang, each ring echoing in the quiet diner. Finally, a gruff voice answered, laced with suspicion. Ruiz. Glenn, it's Ryland. A pause, heavy with unspoken tension. Ryland? What the hell do you want? Ryland took a deep breath, the words hanging in the air like smoke. I need to talk. About Glass Vale. Another silence, longer this time, punctuated by the crackling static of the line. Then Ruiz's voice, low and strained. You shouldn't be asking about that. Some things are better left buried. Not this, Ryland said, his voice hardening with resolve. Not anymore. He glanced out the window, the rain blurring the lights into abstract shapes. Meet me tomorrow. Usual place. He hung up before Ruiz could respond, the dial tone a stark punctuation to the conversation. He knew he was walking into a minefield, but he had to try. For her, for himself, for the truth that lay buried beneath layers of deception. He had a feeling Zaria was already on the same path, and he had to catch up. He thought about calling her, warning her, but something stopped him, a feeling that she already knew, that she was waiting. He fished his phone out and called her, letting it ring once, twice, and then disconnecting before it could reach voicemail. A silent message, a signal. He knew she'd understand. He had to trust her. The muted hum of the refrigerator was the only sound penetrating the suffocating silence of her apartment. Zaria sat on the edge of her bed, the worn fabric a familiar comfort against the icy chill that had settled deep within her. Arizona heat shimmered outside, a stark contrast to the Arctic landscape her mind replayed. The desert air, usually a balm, felt heavy, suffocating. Ryland. The name echoed in the hollow chambers of her memory, a phantom pain throbbing alongside the ghost of his touch. He'd recognized her, not Zaria Trennan, the veterinary technician who meticulously charted the weights of pampered chihuahuas. No, he saw Anakari, the ghost he'd thought buried in the sands of Bahrain. The tattoo, a stylized phoenix hidden beneath the curve of her wrist, had betrayed her, a mark of their shared hell. A brand that whispered of secrets best left undisturbed. Her fingers traced the faded ink, the sensation of phantom limb, a memory of fire and pain. Bahrain. The op had gone sideways faster than Sandstorm. Intel was faulty, the extraction point compromised. She'd been separated from her team, trapped in a crumbling building as the city erupted around her. Gunfire, screams, the metallic tang of blood thick in the air. The extraction team gone, vaporized in a flash of white-hot agony. She could still see their faces, etched in the flickering light of the burning building, hear their final, choked breaths. Guilt, a corrosive acid, gnawed at the edges of her sanity. She'd made it out. They hadn't. Why? The question, a barbed hook, snagged on her soul, refusing to let go. She'd run, fueled by adrenaline and terror, the desert a vast, indifferent canvas swallowing her whole. She'd shed Anaka-Uri like a snake sheds its skin, burying her deep beneath the carefully constructed facade of Zaria Trennan. A new life, a new identity, a desperate attempt to outrun the ghost that clawed at her heels. She'd thought she'd escaped. Foolish. Ryland's eyes, sharp and knowing, had shattered the fragile illusion of normalcy she'd so painstakingly crafted. He hadn't forgotten. How could he? The rhythmic tick of the clock on her nightstand grated on her nerves, each second a hammer blow against the fragile walls of her composure. She rose, pacing the confines of her apartment, the space feeling smaller, more suffocating with each restless stride. The cool tile beneath her bare feet offered no solace, the chill seeping into her bones, mirroring the icy dread that gripped her heart. He knew, and he wouldn't let it go. He'd hunt her, dissect her life, piece by piece, until he uncovered the truth. The truth she'd buried so deep, she'd almost convinced herself it was a lie. A sudden, sharp image flashed through her mind. Fallujah, not Bahrain. An earlier mission, the memory shrouded in a haze of smoke and screams. A child, no older than 5, clutching a tattered doll, his eyes wide with terror as the world around him dissolved into chaos. She'd been ordered to eliminate a high-value target, a man holed up in a nearby building. She'd taken a shot. Clean, precise, efficient. Only later did she learn the target had been using the child as a human shield. The memory, a festering wound, pulsed with a fresh wave of agony. The doll, stained crimson, the child's vacant stare had haunted her sleep, a recurring nightmare whispering of the price of obedience, the cost of her supposed heroism. She pressed her hands against her temples, trying to quell the rising tide of nausea. She convinced herself it was necessary, a sacrifice for the greater good. The propaganda they drilled into them, the constant reinforcement of their righteousness, had provided a temporary shield against the horror. But the shield had cracked, shattered into a million pieces, leaving her exposed to the raw, brutal reality of her actions. She wasn't a hero. She was a killer, a ghost draped in the tattered remnants of a life she could never reclaim. Ryland, he was a different kind of ghost, a reminder of a time when she believed in something, when the lines between right and wrong hadn't been so blurred. He'd saved her life in Kabul, shielding her from a hail of gunfire, his body a living barrier between her and certain death. She owed him, more than she could ever repay. But how could she explain? How could she unravel the tangled web of lies and deceit that had become her life? The thought of exposing Glass Veil, of dragging its secrets into the light, sent a shiver down her spine. The agency, its tendrils reaching into every corner of the government, wouldn't hesitate to silence her. And Ryland'd be caught in the crossfire. He deserved better. He deserved the truth. But the truth was a dangerous weapon, capable of destroying everything in its path. She picked up her phone, her fingers trembling as she scrolled through her contacts. Glenn Ruiz, former logistics man for the agency. He'd known the inner workings, the dirty secrets buried beneath layers of classified documents. He was her only hope. The phone rang 3 times before he answered, his voice hesitant, laced with fear. "Hello, Glenn, it's Anaka," she said, the name feeling foreign on her tongue. A long silence followed, punctuated only by the static hiss of the line. "Anaka? But I'm alive, Glenn, and I need your help." She took a deep breath, the words tumbling out in a rush. "We need to expose Glass Veil. All of it. The missions, the casualties, the lies." Another silence, heavier this time, pregnant with unspoken fear. "They'll kill us, Anaka. They'll kill us both." "I know," she whispered, her voice trembling. "But we have to try, for the ones we lost, for the ones who are still trapped in the dark." A long, shuddering sigh echoed through the phone. "All right, Anaka. All right. Tell me what you need." The first crack in the wall had appeared, a sliver of hope in the suffocating darkness. She wasn't alone. Not anymore. And for the first time in a long time, Zaria, or perhaps Anaka, felt a flicker of warmth in the icy wasteland of her heart. The fight would be brutal, the consequences devastating. But she was ready. She had to be. The muted hum of the refrigerator was the only sound in the otherwise silent house. Ryland sat hunched over his desk, the harsh glare of the laptop screen reflecting in his tired eyes. The digital clock in the corner blinked 3:17 a.m. Sleep was a luxury he hadn't afforded himself since the encounter at the shooting range. Zaria, the name, the face, the tattoo, it clawed at the edges of his memory, a ghost from a past he thought he'd buried. He'd tried to dismiss it, to chalk it up to a resemblance, a trick of the light. But the disquiet wouldn't let him be. It gnawed at him, a persistent itch under his skin. He had to know. He ran a hand over his close-cropped hair, the rasp of stubble a familiar comfort in the unsettling stillness. The files he'd managed to pull heavily redacted, fragmented whispers of a program, so clandestine it barely had a name, offered little concrete evidence, but enough breadcrumbs to follow. Operation Glass Veil. The name itself was an enigma, hinting at something obscured, something seen but not understood. The more he delved, the more he felt like he was staring into a distorted mirror, seeing flashes of recognition but unable to grasp the whole picture. Most of the documentation was standard bureaucratic jargon budgets, personnel requests, logistical nightmares. But tucked away within the sterile language were the references that had snagged his attention. Off-record asset. The phrase was repeated several times, always in connection with unusually high expenditures and vague descriptions of specialized training. He tapped his pen against the desk, the rhythmic click echoing in the quiet. An asset, disposable, deniable. The taste in his mouth soured. He'd seen enough of those in his time with SEAL Team 6, Ghosts in the Machine, their existence erased as soon as their usefulness expired. Could Zaria have been one of them? He scrolled through the documents again, the lines blurring into a meaningless jumble. Frustration tightened its grip around his chest. It was like chasing smoke. He needed something more concrete, a link, a connection. And then he saw it, tucked away in a footnote, almost an afterthought. See attached file Red Wire Protocol. Red Wire. The name resonated, a faint echo in the recesses of his memory. He'd heard whispers of it before, hushed conversations in darkened rooms, legends passed among the operators. A failsafe, a last resort. The specifics were always shrouded in secrecy, a need-to-know basis that he'd never met. He searched for the attached file, his pulse quickening with a mixture of anticipation and dread. It wasn't there. Redacted. Of course. A wave of exhaustion washed over him, the weight of the unanswered questions pressing down. He leaned back in his chair, closing his eyes, trying to piece together the fragmented puzzle. Zaria. Glass veil. Off-record asset. Red wire. The pieces swirled in his mind, refusing to connect. Was she a victim? A participant? He couldn't shake the image of her at the range, the quiet competence in her movements, the flicker of something cold and hard in her eyes. It didn't fit the profile of a victim. He opened his eyes, his gaze settling on a framed photograph on his desk. Him and his team, after a successful mission. Faces etched with fatigue and relief. The camaraderie forged and shared danger palpable even in the still image. He remembered the mission, the near-impossible odds, the desperate fight for survival. And he remembered Zaria, not the woman from the shooting range, but a phantom, a fleeting glimpse of skill and precision that had saved their lives. He had never known her real name, just a call sign, a whisper in the calms. But he'd never forgotten her. He pushed away the gnawing doubt. He had to see her again, to talk to her, to understand. He had to know what Glass Veil truly was, what they had done, what they had become. He reached for his phone, his fingers hovering over the screen. It was a long shot, a desperate gamble. But he had to try. He pulled up Zaria's contact information, a simple name and number, a thin thread connecting him to a past that was both familiar and alien. He hesitated, a flicker of uncertainty crossing his face. What was he hoping to achieve? What if she refused to talk? What if the truth was something he wasn't prepared to face? He pushed the doubts aside, the need to know overriding his caution. He pressed the call button, the ringing tone echoing in the quiet room, each beep a hammer blow against the wall of silence he was determined to break. The call went straight to voicemail. He disconnected, a knot of frustration tightening in his gut. He would try again later. He had to. He stood up, pacing the length of his study, the rhythmic creak of the floorboards a counterpoint to the turmoil in his mind. He couldn't shake the feeling that he was missing something crucial, a key piece of the puzzle that would unlock the secrets of Glass Veil. He stopped before his bookshelf, his gaze scanning the titles, searching for something, he wasn't sure what. His hand reached out, almost involuntarily, and pulled out a thick, leather-bound volume, a collection of declassified intelligence reports from the Cold War era. He flipped through the pages, his eyes skimming over the text, a vague sense of familiarity pulling him forward. And then he saw it, a small, grainy photograph tucked away in the appendix. A group of men and women, their faces obscured by shadows, standing before a nondescript building. The caption read, Subject, Project Nightingale Experimental Behavioral Modification Program. A chill ran down his spine. He recognized the building. It was the same one that appeared, heavily redacted, in the Glass Veil documents. He turned back to the text, his heart pounding in his chest. Project Nightingale, a program designed to create the perfect operatives, soldiers without conscience, programmed to obey without question. The methods were brutal, the results unpredictable. The program had been deemed a failure, shut down, buried. Or so he thought. He stared at the photograph, the pieces of the puzzle finally clicking into place. Glass Veil wasn't just a continuation of Nightingale. It was its evolution, a darker, more insidious iteration. The off-record assets weren't just disposable tools. They were products meticulously crafted and controlled. And Zarya, she wasn't just a victim. She was Redwire, the ultimate fail-safe, programmed to eliminate any threat to the program, even the program itself. The realization hit him with the force of a physical blow. He sank back in his chair, the weight of the truth crushing him. He had to warn her. He had to tell her what they had done to her, what they were still capable of. He reached for the phone again, his hands trembling. This time, he wouldn't leave a message. He would find her, and he would tell her everything. He pulled out his laptop again, this time focusing on contact lists of former logistics personnel. He knew he had to go off the books, to the shadows where information hid in fear. He scrolled through the names, each one a flicker of a potential lead. Finally, he found him, Glenn Ruiz, former logistics for a shell corporation known to funnel funds into black ops programs. The call connected after 2 rings. A hesitant voice answered, laced with suspicion. "Hello, Glenn Ruiz." Ryland kept his voice low, steady. "Who's asking?" "A friend of friend. We need to talk about Glass Veil." A long silence followed, broken only by the faint sound of static. Ryland could practically hear the gears turning in Ruiz's head, weighing the risks, calculating the odds. Finally, Ruiz spoke, his voice barely a whisper. "I don't know what you're talking about. Don't you, Glenn? Or are you just afraid to remember?" Ryland pressed, injecting a steel edge into his voice. "Anaka Ri sends her regards." He knew it was a gamble, but he sensed that Ruiz knew more than he was letting on. The name had the desired effect. Ruiz's breath hitched. "Anaka, she's alive. For now," Ryland said, his voice grim. "But if we don't act fast, that might change. We need to expose Glass Veil, Glenn, and we need your help." Another long silence. Then a resigned sigh. "All right," Ruiz said, his voice laced with a mixture of fear and resolve. "Tell me what you need." Ryland felt a flicker of hope ignite within him. It was a small victory, a crack in the wall of secrecy. But it was a start. The sterile scent of disinfectant hung heavy in the air, a familiar comfort that did little to soothe the gnawing unease in Zarya's gut. Sunlight streamed through the clinic's large windows, illuminating dust motes dancing in the air, a stark contrast to the shadows that clung to the edges of her mind. Each chirp of a caged bird, each whimper from a recovering dog, felt amplified, grating on her nerves. She moved mechanically, her hands steady as she prepared a syringe, but her mind was a whirlwind of fragmented memories, the biting desert wind, the glint of steel, the echo of gunfire. He recognized me. The thought pulsed like a second heartbeat, a relentless drumbeat against her carefully constructed facade. He knows. She'd spent years building this life, brick by painstaking brick. Zarya Trenton, veterinary technician, lover of animals, quiet and unremarkable. A ghost of a life, but a safe one. Now, that fragile sanctuary was threatened. The man from the range, the ghost from her past, had shattered the illusion with a single word. Glass Veil. Just the name was enough to send a shiver down her spine. A phantom pain echoing the real wounds she carried, both visible and unseen. She forced herself to focus on the task at hand, her fingers working with practiced efficiency. A small kitten, barely bigger than her hand, mewed softly. She stroked its fur, the soft texture a grounding sensation against the turmoil within. Don't think about it. Not now. But the memories were insistent, flashing through her mind the rigorous training, the brutal missions, the faces of those she pushed the thought away, guilt clawing at her throat. Survival. It was always about survival. The jingle of the bell above the door jolted her. Her hand instinctively went to her side, where a phantom weapon should have been. She forced herself to relax, reminding herself that this was a vet clinic, not a war zone. A young couple entered, their faces etched with worry, a whimpering golden retriever cradled in their arms. Zarya plastered a reassuring smile on her face, the familiar routine a welcome distraction. Just another day, just another patient. But as she turned to greet them, her breath caught in her throat. Standing just behind the couple, his figure filling the doorway, was the man from the range. His eyes, the color of a stormy sea, were fixed on her, an intensity that made her blood run cold. The casual clothes he wore did little to conceal the hard lines of his body, the aura of command that radiated from him. He was a predator, and she was his prey. Panic flared, threatening to consume her. Run, hide, disappear. But her feet were rooted to the spot, a strange paralysis gripping her. She knew, with a chilling certainty, that there was nowhere to run. He would find her. He always did. The couple moved towards the examination room, oblivious to the silent battle raging between Zaria and the man in the doorway. He waited until they were out of earshot, then took a step closer, his voice low and dangerous. Anaka-Ri, he said, the name a whisper of steel against the sterile air. It was the name she'd buried, the name that belonged to the ghost she tried so hard to leave behind. Hearing that name, a name she hadn't heard spoken aloud in years, felt like a physical blow. The carefully constructed walls around her heart crumbled, exposing the raw, vulnerable core beneath. Her carefully crafted mask slipped, revealing the fear and the guilt that haunted her every waking moment. He knows. He knows everything. A wave of dizziness washed over her, and she gripped the counter for support. The world seemed to tilt, the familiar scents and sounds of the clinic fading into a distant hum. "Who were you talking about?" she stammered, the words tasting like ash in her mouth. The denial was automatic, a desperate attempt to cling to the remnants of her fabricated life. But even as she spoke the words, she knew they were futile. The look in his eyes, the unwavering certainty in his stance, told her that he knew the truth. He stepped closer, the space between them shrinking until she could feel the heat radiating from his body. The scent of the outdoors clung to him, a stark contrast to the antiseptic smell of the clinic. "Don't play games, Anaka," he said, his voice softening slightly, but the steel remained. "It's me, Ryland." The name resonated deep within her, triggering a cascade of memories, a shared mission, a life saved, a bond forged in fire and blood. Blake Ryland, the man she thought she'd left behind in the dust and shadows of their shared past. He was here, a tangible reminder of everything she'd tried to forget. The truth, like a venomous serpent, uncoiled in her gut. There was no escape. "What?" The word was a choked whisper, barely audible above the rhythmic thump of her own heart. Why was he here? Why now, after all these years? He studied her, his gaze intense, searching. "Glass veil," he said, the words hanging heavy in the air. "I need to know what happened. Why you disappeared." A bitter laugh escaped her lips, a sound devoid of humor. "You think you could just waltz in here, after all this time, and demand answers?" The anger was a sudden, unexpected surge, a desperate attempt to push back the tide of fear that threatened to overwhelm her. His expression didn't change. "I deserve answers, Anaka. We all do." The weight of his words pressed down on her, crushing her beneath the burden of guilt and regret. He was right. They deserve answers. The families of those lost, the victims of the lies and manipulations, they all deserve to know the truth, even if that truth would destroy her. "Then let's give them answers," she said, the words surprising even herself. The fear remained, a cold knot in her stomach, but it was mingled with a strange sense of resolve. It was time to face the ghosts of her past, time to expose the secrets that had haunted her for so long. She reached for her phone, her hand steady despite the tremor that ran through her body. "I know someone who can help," she said, dialing a number she hadn't used in years. A voice, hesitant and laced with fear, answered on the other end. "Glenn," she said, her voice firm, "it's Anaka." It's time we told them everything. The desert wind whipped Zaria's hair across her face, tasting of dust and sun-baked earth. Lake Pleasant shimmered in the distance, a mirage of blue against the ochre landscape. A hawk circled high above, a solitary sentinel against the vast, indifferent sky. She could feel the phantom weight of a rifle against her shoulder, the ingrained instinct to scan for threats a reflex she couldn't shake. Ryland stood a few feet away, his silhouette stark against the horizon, an immovable object amidst the shifting sands. The silence between them was thick with unspoken questions, heavy with the ghosts of their shared past. He knows, the thought hammered in her skull, a dull, persistent ache. He knows about Glass Veil. Why? Ryland's voice finally broke the stillness, rough as granite. The single word hung in the air, demanding an answer she wasn't sure she could give. Zaria swallowed, her throat dry. The confession clawed at her, a living thing trying to escape. Glass Veil wasn't what you thought it was, she began, her voice a thin thread against the wind. She wrapped her arms around herself, a futile attempt to ward off the chill that had nothing to do with the desert air. Just say it, Anaka. Tell him everything. He turned, his gaze sharp and assessing. What do you mean? Each word felt like a betrayal, a chipping away at the wall she'd built around herself. It wasn't about intelligence. It was about instigation. The word tasted like ash in her mouth. She saw a flicker of something in his eyes, disbelief, anger, perhaps a touch of the same sick realization that had haunted her for years. He deserves to know. He earned the right to know the truth. Ryland's jaw tightened. Instigation? You're saying they were manufacturing conflict? She nodded, the movement small and tight, creating a need for intervention, for resources, for economic gain. Every syllable was a weight dragging her down. She'd carried this burden alone for so long, the truth a festering wound in her soul. Now laying it bare felt both terrifying and liberating. He took a step closer, the intensity of his gaze almost physical. The attack on my convoy in Fallujah. Zaria closed her eyes briefly, the memory a vivid, searing flash. The chaos, the screams, the metallic tang of blood in the air. It was a setup, Blake. They sent you into a kill zone. It wasn't supposed to happen that way, she whispered, the words barely audible. Ryland's hands clenched into fists at his sides. What wasn't supposed to happen, Zaria? My men dying? Me almost dying. His voice, raw with pain and barely suppressed fury, was a mirror to the guilt that gnawed at her insides. The initial intel was faulty, deliberately faulty. They wanted AA catalyst. The nausea churned in her stomach. She couldn't meet his eyes. I changed the plan. I rerouted your convoy. I saved your team. A long silence stretched between them, broken only by the whisper of the wind. He studied her, his expression unreadable. He doesn't believe me. He thinks I'm lying. The fear coiled in her gut, cold and sharp. Saved us. Ryland's voice was laced with a bitter irony that cut deeper than any blade. By what miracle did you save us, Zaria? While the rest of our support was conveniently delayed. The truth was a jagged shard of glass lodged in her throat. I intercepted the comms. I alerted your team. I bought you time. The words tumbled out in a rush, desperate and raw. He needs to understand. And the price? He asked, his voice low and dangerous. She looked at him then, finally meeting his gaze. The anguish in his eyes mirrored her own. The price, she repeated, the words thick with unshed tears, was everything. The desert wind seemed to hold its breath, as if listening to the confession that followed. Zaria told him about the altered mission parameters, the betrayal, the frantic scramble to minimize the damage. She told him about the firefight, the desperate fight for survival, the faces of the men she couldn't save. And then she told him about the warehouse, the improvised bomb, and the choice she made. I had to make a decision, Blake. A terrible decision. Her voice cracked, the dam of her composure finally breaking. I could let your team die, or I could sacrifice the asset. Each word was a fresh wound, tearing open the scars she'd tried so desperately to hide. The asset. Ryland's brow furrowed. Zaria's breath hitched in her throat. A child. A young boy. He was being used as leverage, a pawn in their game. The image of the boy's terrified eyes haunted her still, a permanent stain on her soul. I can still hear him screaming. The silence that followed was heavy with the weight of her confession. The hawk cried overhead, a mournful sound that echoed the desolation in her heart. Ryland's expression was unreadable, a mask of controlled fury and dawning comprehension. He finally understood the true cost of her actions, the burden she had carried alone for so long. "So you saved my Teamby, sacrificing a child?" His voice was flat, devoid of emotion. But Zarya saw the pain in his eyes, the horror that mirrored her own. She closed her eyes, the tears finally spilling down her cheeks. "I had no choice, Blake. It was the only way." He turned away, staring out at the vast expanse of the desert. The silence stretched, thick with unspoken accusations and the shared weight of their broken past. Finally, he spoke, his voice barely a whisper. "What do we do now?" Zarya opened her eyes, a spark of resolve igniting in the depths of her despair. "We fight back. We expose them, Blake. We tell the world what they did." Ryland turned back to her, a flicker of hope in his eyes. "It won't be easy. They'll come after us." She met his gaze, her own hardening with determination. "Let them come. I'm not running anymore." She pulled out her phone, her hand trembling slightly. "It's time." She dialed a number she hadn't used in years, a number that connected her to the last vestiges of her former life. The phone rang once, twice, then a hesitant voice answered. "Glenn Ruiz speaking." "Glenn," Zarya said, her voice steady despite the tremor in her hand. "It's Anaka. I need your help." Glenn's voice was laced with fear. "Anaka? But I thought, I know what you thought. But it's time, Glenn. It's time to tell the truth." The desert air hung thick and heavy, the kind of oppressive heat that clung to the skin long after the sun had dipped below the horizon. Quartzsite's neon glow bled into the inky sky, a garish counterpoint to the vast, silent expanse surrounding the roadside motel. Zarya could feel the thrum of the highway, a constant, low vibration that mirrored the uneased churning in her stomach. Room 17, she thought, the number echoing in her mind like a death knell. It was supposed to be a clean break, a chance to finally unburden herself of the ghost that had haunted her for years. But even now, with the flash drive clutched tight in her hand, the weight of it pressed down on her, heavier than any weapon she'd ever carried. Blake stood by the cracked window, his silhouette a dark, imposing figure against the faint light filtering through the blinds. He turned, his gaze sharp and assessing, a mirror of the relentless focus she remembered from their time in the program. He was a storm waiting to be unleashed, a force of nature she'd both admired and feared. Back then, his unwavering determination had been a lifeline. Now, she couldn't decipher if it was a threat or a promise. "You sure about this, Anaka?" He hadn't called her by that name in years. Hearing it now, rolling off his tongue like a forgotten prayer, sent a shiver down her spine. "It's Zarya now," she corrected, the words catching in her throat. Her palms were slick with sweat, and she rubbed them against her jeans, a futile attempt to quell the tremor that ran through her. He remembers, she thought, the realization a cold knot in her gut. He remembers everything. And I'm sure, this needs to end. The flash drive felt burning hot in her hand, a physical manifestation of the secrets it held. He took a step closer, the subtle shift in his posture speaking volumes. He was predator and prey, judge and jury, all rolled into one formidable package. He reached out, his fingers brushing against hers as he took the drive. The contact, brief as it was, sent a jolt of something akin to electricity through her. She recoiled, tucking her hands behind her back, the phantom sensation lingering on her skin. "What's on this?" His voice was low, almost a murmur, but the intensity in his eyes was unmistakable. "Everything," she whispered, her voice barely audible above the hum of the air conditioner struggling against the desert heat. "Names, dates, locations. Proof of what Glassvale really was. Proof of what they did." The words tasted like ash in her mouth. For so long, she'd buried the truth deep inside, locked it away in the darkest corners of her mind. Now, unleashing it felt like tearing open a wound, exposing the raw, festering pain beneath. Blake studied the drive for a moment, his expression unreadable. "They won't just let this go, Zarya." He met her gaze, his eyes reflecting the neon glow from outside, casting strange shadows on his face. They'll come for you. They'll come for anyone connected to this. I know, she said, the words barely a breath. She'd been running for years, living in the shadows, constantly looking over her shoulder. The fear had become a constant companion, a dull ache that never truly faded. But the thought of continuing to run, of carrying the weight of Glass Vale's secrets alone, was more terrifying than facing the consequences. A sudden screech of tires outside cut through the silence. Zaria's breath caught in her throat. They're here. The thought flashed through her mind, a chilling premonition of what was to come. Blake's hand shot to his side, instinctively reaching for a weapon that wasn't there. He swore under his breath, his eyes scanning the room, assessing their options. "We have to go," he said, his voice clipped and urgent. He grabbed her hand, pulling her towards the back door. The sudden contact sent a jolt through her, a mixture of fear and something else, something she couldn't quite name. Not again, she thought, the memories of their shared past flooding back, a confusing jumble of adrenaline and shared danger. I can't let him pull me back into that world. They burst out into the cool night air, the sudden change in temperature a stark contrast to the oppressive heat of the motel room. Two black SUVs blocked the exit, their headlights casting long, menacing shadows across the cracked asphalt. Men in dark suits emerged from the vehicles, their movements swift and coordinated, weapons drawn. "No other way out," Blake muttered, his grip tightening on her hand. He pulled her towards the chain-link fence bordering the motel property. The desert stretched out beyond, a vast, unforgiving landscape. "Run," her instinct screamed. "Run and don't look back." The agents were closing in, their footsteps echoing in the still night air. Blake scaled the fence with surprising agility, hauling himself over the top. He reached down, his hand outstretched. Zaria! Hesitation flickered through her. This was it. This was the point of no return. Going with him meant stepping back into the darkness, embracing the life she tried so desperately to leave behind. But staying meant being captured, silenced. It meant letting Glass Vale's secrets remain buried forever. She took a deep breath, pushing aside the fear and the doubt. She grasped his hand, the strength in his grip reassuringly familiar. He pulled her up and over the fence, the metal biting into her palms. They ran, the desert stretching out before them, an endless expanse of darkness. The sound of gunfire erupted behind them, the bullets ripping through the night air, a stark reminder of the danger they were in. But as she ran, a strange sense of calm settled over her. She wasn't running away anymore. She was running towards something, towards the truth. Later, huddled in a dusty diner miles away, Zaria dialed a number she hadn't used in years. "Glenn? It's Anaka. Zaria, I need your help." The voice on the other end was hesitant, laced with fear. "They're after me, Glenn. They're after all of us. We need to expose this. We need to tell the world what they did." A long silence stretched between them, filled only with the crackle of the static on the line. Finally, Glenn's voice, barely a whisper, came through. "I am scared, Zaria." "I know," she said, her voice firm. "But we have to do this. For all the lives they ruined. For all the people they silenced." Another pause, and then, Okay, I'll do it." Blake watched her, his expression unreadable. The diner's fluorescent lights cast harsh shadows on his face, accentuating the lines of fatigue and the grim set of his jaw. He didn't need to ask who she'd been talking to. He knew. "We're in this together now," he said, his voice low. Zaria met his gaze, a flicker of something akin to hope igniting within her. The road ahead would be dangerous. They would be hunted, pursued, their every move scrutinized. But for the first time in a long time, she didn't feel alone. She had an ally. She had a purpose. And she had the truth. The air hung thick and heavy with the scent of dust and decay. The gas station, a skeletal husk against the bleached Arizona sky, stood sentinel over a stretch of cracked asphalt that shimmered with heat haze. 30 miles to the west, the Colorado River snaked through the desert, a ribbon of life in this desolate landscape. Zarya gripped the steering wheel, her knuckles white. The flash drive, nestled in her pocket, felt like a live wire, pulsing with the weight of its secrets. This was it, the point of no return. A tremor ran through her, not fear, but a strange, hollow anticipation. She glanced at Blake, his profile stark against the window, the desert light carving deep shadows beneath his cheekbones. His eyes, fixed on the horizon, held a grim determination that mirrored her own. He hadn't spoken much since their tense reunion at the range, a silent acknowledgement of the chasm that lay between their shared past and the uncertain present. Glenn Ruiz, the logistics man, had taken some convincing. He'd initially sounded terrified, his voice a thin thread crackling over the burner phone. He'd rambled about plausible deniability and keeping his head down. Zarya had understood. Fear was a rational response to the truth they were about to unleash. She'd appealed to his sense of duty, to the buried ember of idealism she suspected still flickered within him. He finally agreed, his voice a resigned sigh. He was already waiting when they arrived, hunched in the shadow of the gas station's overhang, a crumpled figure in a faded baseball cap. He looked older than she remembered, the lines around his eyes etched deeper, his shoulders slumped with a weariness that spoke of a heavy conscience. He jumped as their car crunched to a halt on the gravel, his hand instinctively reaching inside his jacket. "Easy, Glenn," Blake's voice, low and steady, cut through the silence. "It's just us." Glenn's hand slowly retreated, his eyes darting between Zarya and Blake, a flicker of recognition in their depths. "Anaka," he breathed, the name a ghost from another life. He looked at her, really looked at her, the faded jeans and plain t-shirt doing little to disguise the woman he once knew. The woman who had moved like a phantom, a whisper in the corridors of power. He swallowed hard, the Adam's apple bobbing in his throat. Zarya forced a small smile, a pale imitation of the genuine warmth she once felt for the man who had kept their operation supplied and under the radar. "Glenn, it's good to see you." The words felt strange on her tongue, a hollow echo of a camaraderie long buried. The silence stretched, punctuated only by the mournful sigh of the wind whistling through the broken panes of the gas station's windows. "I wasn't sure you'd actually come," Glenn stammered, his gaze flitting nervously to the deserted highway. "We're here," Zarya replied, her voice quiet but firm. "We need your help." She reached into her pocket and pulled out the flash drive, its metallic surface glinting in the harsh sunlight. Her heart pounded against her ribs, a frantic bird trapped in a cage. This small piece of plastic held the key to dismantling the lies, the manipulation, the years of covert operations shrouded in secrecy. It was a weapon, more powerful than any she had ever wielded. Glenn's eyes widened as he recognized the drive. His breath hitched. "That's everything." "Everything," Zarya confirmed, her voice barely above a whisper. The weight of the decision settled heavily on her shoulders. There was no turning back now. She handed him the drive. "We need you to get this to the right people. People who won't be silenced." She thought of the journalists she'd contacted, the ones who still held a flickering flame of integrity. They were her last hope. Glenn clutched the drive as if it were a lifeline. His hand trembled. "This is dangerous, Anaka. You know that, right? They'll come after you. After all of us." Fear, raw and visceral, emanated from him, a tangible presence in the stifling air. Zarya's gaze met his, unwavering. "I know," she said, her voice steady despite the turmoil raging within her. "But we can't let them get away with it. Not anymore." The years of living in the shadows, the constant fear, the gnawing guilt, it was time to bring it all into the light. Blake, who had remained silent until now, stepped forward, his presence a solid, reassuring force. "We'll handle it, Glenn," he said, his voice low and resonant, the tone brooking no argument. He looked at Zarya, a flicker of understanding passing between them. "We'll face this together." Glenn hesitated for a moment longer, the internal battle raging on his face. Then, with a deep breath, he nodded. "All right," he said, his voice hoarse. "I'll do it." I'll make sure the world knows the truth about Glassvale. He tucked the flash drive deep inside his jacket pocket, his fingers lingering on the small, rectangular shape. He looked at Zaria, his expression a mixture of fear and a strange, newfound resolve. "Thank you," he whispered, the words barely audible. "Thank you for trusting me." Zaria nodded, a single tear tracing a path down her cheek. It wasn't a tear of sadness or fear, but of relief. The burden she had carried for so long, the suffocating weight of her secrets, had finally been lifted. The truth was out there now, a fragile seed planted in the barren landscape of deceit. It was time to watch it grow. As they drove away, leaving Glenn a solitary figure against the backdrop of the decaying gas station, Zaria felt a sense of liberation she hadn't experienced in years. The desert stretched before them, vast and unforgiving, but for the first time, she didn't feel lost in its immensity. She had a purpose now, a reason to fight. She glanced at Blake, a silent question in her eyes. He met her gaze, his expression unreadable. The road ahead was uncertain, fraught with danger, but they would face it together. They had started to dismantle the web of lies, and they wouldn't stop until the truth was exposed, no matter the cost. The silence in the car wasn't the heavy, oppressive silence of secrets kept, but shared understanding of the battles yet to come. It was the silence of warriors preparing for war. The air hung thick and heavy with a lingering scent of gasoline, a phantom reminder of the fuel that hadn't been pumped in years. The rusted sign of the abandoned gas station creaked rhythmically in the desert wind, a mournful counterpoint to the silence that descended between them. Zaria leaned against the chipped brick wall, the rough texture a cold contrast to the burning turmoil inside her. Blake stood a few feet away, his posture rigid, the tension radiating from him a palpable force. She could still feel the echo of his hand on her arm, the heat of his gaze boring into her, demanding answers that had been locked away for too long. He knows, she thought, the words a chilling whisper against the backdrop of her fear. He remembers. The realization hammered against her fragile composure. Every carefully constructed layer of her new identity, every brick of her carefully built wall of anonymity, threatened to crumble under the weight of his recognition. The desert wind whipped strands of hair across her face, momentarily obscuring her vision, mirroring the chaos that swirled within her. How much did he remember? How much did he suspect? The questions clawed at her, sharp and insistent. Why? Blake's voice, low and gravelly, sliced through the silence. The single word hung in the air between them, laden with unspoken accusations, unanswered questions. Zaria closed her eyes, drawing a shaky breath. She had run for so long, buried the truth so deep, that unearthing it felt like tearing open a still healing wound. Tell him, a small voice urged within her. Tell him everything. But fear, a cold, familiar serpent, coiled around her heart, whispering warnings of the dangers that lurked, the consequences that awaited. She had seen firsthand the reach of the organization, the lengths they would go to silence those who threatened their secrets. It wasn't supposed to happen like that, she began, her voice barely a whisper, rough with unshed tears. The words tasted like ash in her mouth. The images of that day, the chaos, the fear, the blood, flashed before her eyes with the brutal clarity of a freshly opened wound. The mission, it went sideways. They were supposed to be extracted. We were supposed to be out. But they left them behind. She could feel Blake's gaze on her, intense, searching. She opened her eyes, meeting his gaze directly, a silent challenge against the fear that threatened to consume her. You were one of them. A muscle twitched in Blake's jaw. His silence was more potent than any accusation. He was piecing it together, the fragments of memory, the whispers of suspicion, coalescing into a horrifying truth. The truth she had carried for so long, a burden that had weighed her down, suffocating her spirit. They deemed you expendable, she continued, the words heavy with the weight of her guilt. The memory of the cold calculation in their superior's voice still sent shivers down her spine. They were going to leave you there. To a D. Her gaze drifted towards the cracked asphalt, towards the ghosts of the past that haunted her still. The desert wind howled, a mournful cry echoing the turmoil within her. The silence stretched, thick and heavy with unspoken words, with a weight of shared trauma. "You saved my life," Blake finally said, his voice hoarse with emotion. It wasn't a question, but a statement, a realization. He was remembering. Zaria nodded, a single tear tracing a path down her cheek. "I disobeyed orders. I pulled you out. I saved you." The admission felt like a confession, a release of a secret she had guarded for far too long. "Why?" he repeated, his voice laced with a mixture of gratitude and confusion. She met his gaze, her own filled with a quiet determination. "Because it was the right thing to do. Because I couldn't live with myself if I didn't." The silence returned, punctuated only by the mournful creak of the rusted sign. This time, it wasn't a silence filled with tension, but with understanding. A shared knowledge of the darkness they had witnessed, the secrets they had carried. "They erased you," Blake stated, the realization dawning in his eyes. "They made it look like you never existed." A bitter laugh escaped Zaria's lips. Anaka Reen never existed. She was a ghost, a fabrication. Zaria Trenton, she died the day I walked away from Glassvale. Blake took a step closer, closing the distance between them. "We can expose them," he said, his voice low, firm. "We can bring them down." Zaria hesitated. The fear was still there, a persistent shadow clinging to the edges of her resolve. But something had shifted within her. Blake's presence, his unwavering gaze, his shared knowledge of the truth, had ignited a spark of hope, a flicker of defiance. She thought of Glenn, her contact, a former logistics man chewed up and spat out by the same system. He would be terrified, but maybe he would be ready to speak. She pulled out her phone, her fingers trembling slightly as she dialed Glenn's number. The ringing tone echoed in the silence, each ring a beat against the drum of her anxiety. He answered on the third ring, his voice hesitant, wary. "Glenn, it's Anaka. Zaria, I need your help." She explained everything, the fear evident in Glenn's voice, but also a growing sense of resolve. He agreed, hesitantly at first, then with a surprising firmness. He was afraid, she knew, but he was also tired of running, tired of hiding. Zaria hung up, a sense of relief washing over her. She looked at Blake, a faint smile playing on her lips. "He'll do it. He'll help us." "It won't be easy," Blake cautioned, his voice laced with a grim realism. "They'll come after us. They'll try to silence us." Zaria met his gaze, her own unwavering. "I know, but we have to try. We have to expose them, for all the others they silenced, for all the lives they destroyed." A shared understanding passed between them, a silent agreement forged in the crucible of their shared past. They stood there, two figures silhouetted against the backdrop of the setting sun, two warriors preparing to face a formidable enemy. The road ahead would be dangerous, fraught with peril, but they would face it together, united by their shared purpose, their unwavering determination to bring the truth to light. Maybe, just maybe, their story would inspire others to speak up, to break the chains of silence, to fight against the injustice that lurked in the shadows. And that, Zaria thought, was a fight worth fighting.